300,000 years. That's how long humans exactly like you, same brain, same body, same capacity for love, fear, and genius, have existed on this planet. And for 288,000 of those years, we built nothing. No cities, no monuments, no permanent homes. Somewhere in that silence is a question that should terrify historians. What were we waiting for? By the end of this video, you'll know the answer. And it's not about intelligence. It's not about ambition. It's about something far more fragile and far more human. On a sun-bleached hillside in Morocco, at a site called Jebel Irhoud, archaeologists were digging for the past, expecting to find something primitive, something ape-like, a rough draft of a human being. Instead, they found us. The oldest known remains of Homo sapiens dating back roughly 300,000 years. Here's where it gets strange. High-resolution CT scans of their skulls revealed faces almost indistinguishable from yours, but the brain case itself was elongated, not yet rounded like ours. A subtle difference, almost cosmetic. Which means whatever they were thinking about around that fire, we will never fully know. Bones don't record language. They don't record dreams. But they record one undeniable fact. We have been here far longer than we ever imagined. And that fact breaks the story we've been told our whole lives. Because if humans with our exact anatomy were walking this earth 300,000 years ago, why did it take almost the entire span of our existence before anything resembling civilization showed up? Why did our ancestors spend 90% of their time on Earth as nomads? No villages, no cities, no monuments, while carrying brains just as capable as the one reading this sentence right now. This wasn't stupidity. This wasn't a lack of ambition. It was something else entirely. And to understand it, we have to go somewhere colder. Somewhere 2 miles beneath the surface of Greenland. Citizens pulled this column of ice from beneath Greenland's surface. It reads like a diary of the sky. Every band a year, every trapped air bubble a message from a world long gone. And when you read far enough down this diary, you find something that should unsettle you. Temperature swings of 10 degrees Celsius or more. Not over centuries, over decades. Sometimes less than a single human lifetime. Now picture what that actually meant on the ground. Somewhere in what is now northern Africa, a family has lived beside the same lake for 3 generations. Children learn to fish here. Grandparents remember when the water reached even higher. This lake is the only version of the world they've ever known. And then, within the span of one woman's adult life, it starts to disappear. Not a drought that eventually breaks, a permanent vanishing. The shoreline retreats a little further every dry season, until the children born beside that lake grow old enough to walk across what used to be its floor. There's a second clue buried in those ice bubbles. Atmospheric CO2 sat dramatically lower than today. Less CO2 meant thinner, less reliable plant growth across an already unpredictable landscape. A family could survive a hard year, even a hard decade, if they kept moving. What no one could survive was building something permanent on ground that might stop being livable in 30 years. So for nearly 300,000 years, the smartest thing a human being could do was refuse to fully unpack. But staying mobile came with its own price, and that price is something most people have never even considered until you see what happened to one woman in one cave 75,000 years ago. In South Africa's Blombos Cave, someone sat by a fire and did something extraordinary. Using a stone point, she engraved this piece of ochre, cutting a precise, deliberate grid, one careful line at a time. This wasn't decoration. This was abstract thought made physical. A symbol. A message sent across time to people she would never meet. We will never know her name, but we know she was there because the ground beneath her also held carefully perforated shell beads and sophisticated tools that required intensive, multi-generational teaching to even replicate. Here's the part that should stop you cold. Look at the archaeological layers just a few thousand years above her. The grid patterns vanish. The beads vanish completely. Why? Because in a world of small, scattered bands, no more than a few dozen people, a community wasn't a library with backup copies. It was a single book with no duplicates. Picture that woman as an elder. If a famine, a disease, or one brutal winter took her and her two apprentices before the knowledge passed on, it didn't fade. It was erased from the species. Permanently. For thousands of years, human brilliance existed as isolated, unwitnessed experiments. A candle lit and relit and allowed to go out again and again, simply because no one was close enough to catch the flame before it died. It sounds like a tragedy, and in a way, it was. But this same fragility, this same isolation that kept erasing our knowledge, is about to do something you won't expect. It's about to save us from the single deadliest event in prehistoric human history. 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano erupted with such force it choked the atmosphere with sulfur dioxide, triggering a volcanic winter across the planet. For decades, genetic models painted a horrifying picture. Humanity pushed to the edge of extinction, reduced to a few thousand survivors clinging on. So archaeologists went looking for the wreckage. They dug through the ash layers in India and Africa, searching for the evidence of collapse. What they found made no sense. The stone tools were unchanged. Above the ash, below the ash. Same technology, same sites. No abandonment. How does a species survive an apocalypse and barely notice? Here's the twist. Our ancestors never shared a single fate. Because they were scattered across vast, disconnected distances, a disaster that wiped out one valley simply never reached the next. The very isolation that made our knowledge so fragile is the same feature that made our species unkillable. We survived Toba not despite being scattered, but because of it. We were too disconnected for one catastrophe to find all of us at once. So now we know the full shape of the trap. Too mobile to build, too isolated to remember, too scattered to be destroyed. A perfect, brutal equilibrium that lasted 300,000 years. So what finally broke it? What changed the rules of the game entirely? The answer is sitting in southern Turkey, and it's going to rewrite everything you thought you knew about how civilization began. The long plateau didn't end because humans suddenly got smarter. We already proved that wrong. The skull scans from Morocco showed our cognitive machinery was fully operational 300,000 years ago. It ended because the planet finally stopped fighting us. Roughly 11,700 years ago, Earth entered the Holocene, an era of climate stability unlike anything that came before. The wild swings stopped. Rainfall became predictable. Atmospheric CO2 rose, carpeting the valleys with reliable wild grain. For generations, the standard story went like this. Humans invented farming first, then built villages, then much later got around to religion and monuments. Göbekli Tepe destroys that timeline completely. Dating back 11,500 years, its 20-ton carved pillars were raised by nomadic hunter-gatherers, people with no farms and no permanent housing. Let that sink in. The impulse to gather, to organize, to build on a monumental scale never needed agriculture. It needed something simpler, and something we've been talking about this entire video. A stable enough world to let separate bands sit in the same room without starving. So here's the truth. This entire journey has been building toward. The genius that raised the pillars of Göbekli Tepe was never missing. It was already there, in the woman who scored her patterns into ochre tens of thousands of years earlier. It was there in every scattered band that outlasted a volcanic winter without ever knowing how close their species came to vanishing. What changed wasn't our intelligence, it was our density. A stable climate let bands stay in one place long enough to grow. More people in one place meant more chances for a single idea to outlive the person who had it. For the first time in 300,000 years, a discovery didn't have to be a fragile single copy, waiting to be erased by one bad winter. It could finally be shared. And for the first time, it could become permanent. We will never know the names of the people who kept that flame alive through 300,000 years of darkness. But we know this: the long, quiet, unwitnessed brilliance of our ancestors was never a delay. It was a patient, invisible wait for the one thing they never had: enough people in one place for long enough to finally remember. And if that changes how you look at the next 99% of human history most people never think about, make sure you're subscribed, because that's exactly the kind of story we tell here.